In the year 1560, Japan's most powerful warlord marched on the capital with 25,000 soldiers, an unstoppable force destined to unite the nation. Only one thing stood in his way: a tiny province led by a 26-year-old outcast known to everyone as the Fool. This is the story of how that fool, with less than 2,000 men, planned to do the impossible, kill a god, and steal an empire. Inside Kyosu Castle, the main stronghold of the Oda clan, the air was thick with a dread so palpable it felt like a physical weight. As frantic, dust-caked messengers arrived bearing the terrible news of Washizu and Maroon, a chilling panic gripped the seasoned generals and advisors. Their outer defenses, the men they had counted on to buy them precious days, had been obliterated in a matter of hours. The full might of the Imagawa host, all 25,000 of them, was now camped just a few miles away, feasting and celebrating before delivering the final, crushing blow. In the main hall, an emergency war council was underway, and the mood was funereal. The numbers being discussed were not just daunting, they were apocalyptic. The entire military strength of the Oda clan, if every able-bodied man could be mustered, was barely 2,000 souls. They were outnumbered more than 10 to 1. To face such a host in the open field would not be a battle, it would be a ritual sacrifice. The clan's most senior retainers, veteran warriors who had fought for the Oda for decades, pleaded with their lord. Their faces were grim, their voices strained with the effort of maintaining their composure. Their advice was unanimous, logical, and born of desperation. They must not fight. They must abandon the outer territories, consolidate their forces, and barricade themselves inside Kyosu Castle. It was a strategy of last resort, a coward's strategy perhaps, but it was the only one that made any sense. Their fear was rooted in the context of the age. This was the height of the Sengoku Jidai, the age of warring states. For more than a century, the island nation had been a fractured mosaic of ambition and bloodshed, a land where the authority of the emperor and his shogun had withered to nothing. In their place, fiercely independent warlords, the daimyo, had risen, carving out domains through intrigue and force of arms. They schemed, they fought, and they bled for the ultimate prize, the ancient imperial capital of Kyoto. To control Kyoto was to control the nation, to hold the shogun as a revered puppet, and to rule all of Japan in his name. It was the dream of 100 warlords, but in the sweltering summer of 1560, no one was closer to making that dream a reality than the man marching against them, Imagawa Yoshimoto. He was the daimyo of 3 wealthy provinces, a man of immense prestige, a student of the courtly arts, a poet, and a calligrapher. But beneath the silk robes and refined manners was a will of tempered steel and a mind for military strategy that had brought him nothing but victory. His clan was among the most respected in the land, and his personal ambition was boundless. He saw himself as the great unifier, the man of destiny who would finally end the chaos of the past century. His march on Kyoto, therefore, was not merely a campaign, it was a coronation procession, a demonstration of power so overwhelming that all would have to bend the knee. His army was a spectacle of feudal might, a moving city of steel and silk. At its heart were 5,000 samurai, the warrior elite of his domains, clad in gleaming lacquered armor of black, red, and gold. Their helmets, adorned with crests of demons, dragons, and antlers, created a fearsome silhouette against the sky. Each was a master of the sword, the spear, and the bow, a warrior born and bred for battle. They were flanked by legions of ashigaru, spearmen, and archers from the peasantry, but who, under Imagawa rule, were well-trained, disciplined, and equipped with thousands of long yari spears that formed an impenetrable hedge of points. The tramp of their war sandals, the jingle of armor, the creak of supply carts, and the neighing of horses created a constant, rolling thunder that announced their arrival for miles. The dust kicked up by their passage was a brown cloud on the horizon, a harbinger of the coming storm. The generals in Kyosu clung to the fragile hope of a siege, but their lord, the 26-year-old Oda Nobunaga, remained strangely, maddeningly calm. He sat through their panicked reports and desperate pleas with an unnerving detachment, occasionally asking a pointed question, but otherwise saying nothing, his gaze distant. This was the man they called Utsuke, the Fool of Owari. Since his youth, Nobunaga had defied every convention of his class. He ran wild with peasant children, dressed in bizarre, mismatched clothing, often half samurai, half peasant, and showed little respect for the ancient formal traditions of the samurai. His behavior was so erratic, so contrary to expectations, that many within his own clan, including some of the men in this very room, believed him to be mentally unstable, an embarrassment who was unfit to lead. And now, in this moment of ultimate crisis, his strange composure seemed to confirm their worst fears. His own generals thought he was mad. But what they didn't know was that Nobunaga's foolishness was a weapon, and he was about to point it at the heart of the Imagawa army. He listened to the arguments for a siege, the logical, sensible plan to cower behind their walls, and when they were finished, he offered no counter-argument. He offered no plan at all. He simply dismissed them with a wave of his hand, telling them to go home and get some rest. His generals were aghast. Rest? With the enemy at the gates. They left the hall in a state of stunned confusion and despair. Their belief that their lord was a fool now solidified into a terrifying certainty. He was going to do nothing. He was going to let them all be slaughtered. The tension was unbearable. Nobunaga was under immense pressure, not just from the enemy outside, but from the storm of doubt and fear within his own castle. Yet what his retainers saw as foolish indifference was, in reality, a mind working at a furious pace. Nobunaga was not idle. For days, he had been processing a stream of intelligence from his network of shinobi, spies and scouts disguised as peasants who moved unseen through the enemy's ranks. He knew their numbers, he knew their leadership, and most importantly, he knew their state of mind. Arrogant, overconfident, and celebrating. He understood something his generals could not grasp. Hiding behind the walls of Kiyosu was not a strategy for survival, it was merely a way to choose the place of one's death. To face 25,000 men in a siege was to guarantee a slow, starving end. The only path to victory, however narrow, however insane it seemed, was to reject all conventional wisdom. It was a moment of supreme strategic genius that would define his entire life. As his commanders left in despair, Nobunaga was finally alone. The time for deception was over. Now, it was time to unleash the plan that no sane man would ever consider. While his advisors saw a fool, Nobunaga was a predator, patiently sifting through information, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. He knew the fear that was gripping his people, the samurai and the peasants of Owari who saw the Imagawa army as the end of their world. He let that fear fester, let the tension build to its absolute peak. As night fell on Kiyosu Castle, a heavy, suffocating silence descended. The great Imagawa army feasted and slept, dreaming of conquest. The Oda generals waited in their quarters, convinced their foolish lord had doomed them all. The fate of an entire province, and the future of Japan itself, rested on the shoulders of one man, an enigma who had yet to reveal his hand. He appeared to be doing nothing, and with every passing moment, the jaws of the trap were closing. Before the pale light of dawn had even touched the sky, in a silent, candle-lit hall within the castle, a lone figure began to dance. It was Oda Nobunaga, clad in the stiff, formal robes of the No theater, his movements precise and filled with a strange, sorrowful grace. He was performing the final, fateful song of Atsumori. The dance tells the story of a young warrior's tragic death in a past war, its lyrics a haunting meditation on the Buddhist concept of impermanence. A man's life of 50 years under the heavens is but a dream, a phantom. Once born, is there anyone who shall not die? This was not an act of madness or despair, it was a ritual of profound meaning, a samurai's solemn preparation for battle. It was Nobunaga accepting the very real possibility of his own death, and in doing so, casting aside all fear, all hesitation, all doubt. It was a moment of absolute clarity. As he finished the dance, his voice ringing out in the empty hall, he cast off the theater robes to reveal the armor beneath. He barked a single, shocking order to a stunned attendant. Blow the horror guy. The deep, resonant blast of the conch shell trumpet shattered the morning silence, a mournful, urgent call that echoed through the castle courtyards. It was the call to arms. But this was not a grand, organized assembly. Nobunaga didn't wait. He stormed out of the hall, his armor glinting in the faint light, and vaulted onto his horse. With only a handful of attendants, he galloped out of the main gate, his voice thundering into the dawn. "Follow me. This is my final battle." His generals and retainers, awakened by the horn, scrambled to assemble their men. They had no idea what the plan was, only that their lord was finally on the move, riding out to meet his destiny. The mobilization was chaotic, a frantic rush to join a leader who was already gone. Scattered across the province, his small forces, totaling no more than 2,000 men, were ordered to a single rallying point, the Atsuta Shrine, a sacred place of worship south of the castle. As his troops trickled in, a motley collection of samurai and ashigaru, Nobunaga stood before the main shrine to pray for victory. There, with his small, cobbled-together army, he turned to face them. He saw their tired, anxious faces, and he knew he had to transform their fear into a weapon. He gave a speech that would become the stuff of legend. He did not speak of defense, nor of survival. He spoke of attack. He pointed toward the Imagawa camp, a force more than 10 times their size, and framed them not as an invincible army, but as an arrogant, complacent mob, drunk on sake and premature victory. He told them, "Do not think of returning alive. We are a tiny force, but we are in our own territory. They are exhausted from their journey and their recent battles. We are fresh. We have the advantage of the land. Do not be afraid." He spoke with an electrifying, borderline insane confidence that was utterly contagious. He was not ordering them to die for him. He was inviting them to share in a victory that would echo through the ages. His charisma was a force of nature. The men, who had been prepared for a hopeless siege just hours before, found themselves roaring in approval, their fear burned away by the heat of his conviction. The plan he revealed was one of insane simplicity. They would ignore the captured forts. They would bypass the 10,000 soldiers of the Imagawa vanguard. They would march directly into the heart of the enemy camp and aim for a single target, the head of the snake, Imagawa Yoshimoto himself. It was a surgical strike against a behemoth, a gamble so audacious that no conventional commander would ever even conceive of it, let alone attempt it. After his speech, Nobunaga led his men on the march. 2,000 men against 25,000. A suicidal charge. But Nobunaga wasn't just counting on courage, he was counting on a secret ally, one that was gathering in the summer sky. They moved quickly, using winding, hidden paths known only to locals to avoid detection. This was their land, their home turf, and Nobunaga used that advantage to its fullest, moving his small army like a ghost through the landscape. As they marched under the rising heat of the midday sun, the final pieces of his plan fell into place. His spies reported that the main Imagawa army was still at ease in the gorge, celebrating their victories, completely oblivious. The trap was set. Nobunaga's small army was no longer a frightened band of defenders. It was a guided missile, a spear forged in the fire of desperation and aimed at the heart of an empire. The thunderous gamble had begun. As the Oda army stealthily took up a position on a hill overlooking the Imagawa camp, the sky began to change. The oppressive, humid air of the Japanese summer grew still and heavy. The relentless drone of the cicadas fell silent. Far out over Ice Bay, a dark, bruised purple canopy of clouds began to build, a menacing formation that rolled inland with unnatural speed. A divine wind, a kamikaze, was about to blow. From their vantage point, concealed by trees, Nobunaga and his men could see the enemy camp below. It was a scene of relaxed chaos. Thousands of red and white Imagawa banners drooped in the windless air. Samurai, their armor discarded, played games of Go or drank sake. The sounds of their revelry drifted up the hillside. It was just as the scouts had reported. At that moment, a final messenger, a local peasant, scrambled up the hill, breathless. He had just come from the camp, and he confirmed the ultimate prize, Imagawa Yoshimoto's exact location. The great daimyo was in his command post, a grand silk enclosure at the very center of the gorge, watching a display of sumo wrestling and drinking. The target was verified. The moment was here. And then the heavens broke open. A sudden, violent thunderstorm of incredible intensity descended upon the gorge. The wind howled, bending trees to the ground, and rain lashed down in blinding horizontal sheets, turning the ground to instant mud. Thunder cracked with a deafening roar that shook the earth, a sound that would have been indistinguishable from cannon fire had there been any. The storm was not just weather, it was Nobunaga's greatest ally, a cloak of chaos sent from the heavens to conceal his attack. Under the cover of this torrential downpour, Nobunaga turned to his men. Their faces were tense, rain streaming from their helmets. This was the moment he had been waiting for, the perfect confluence of intelligence, timing, and fortune. He drew his sword, pointed it down the hill, and gave the order, "Charge." What followed was not an organized samurai battle with its formal duels and archery exchanges. It was a ferocious, all-or-nothing assault, a human avalanche. 2,000 men plunged down the steep, muddy hillside, slipping and sliding toward the unsuspecting camp below. The driving rain and howling wind completely masked their approach, their war cries swallowed by the thunder. In the Imagawa camp, the sudden storm had already caused confusion. The downpour was so intense that visibility dropped to just a few feet. They mistook the first sounds of the charge for a drunken brawl among their own ranks, or simply the fury of the storm. By the time they realized what was happening, it was too late. The Oda vanguard slammed into the camp like a tidal wave. Panic erupted. Samurai who had cast off their armor struggled to arm themselves, their fingers fumbling with wet leather ties. The long spears of the Ashigaru were useless in the crowded, narrow confines of the gorge. Men were trampled by their own comrades as they fled in every direction. It was utter, bloody chaos. Nobunaga's men, driven by a fanatical resolve, cut a bloody path directly toward the center of the camp, ignoring everything but their objective. They were a torrent of steel and fury. They stormed Yoshimoto's command post, cutting down the guards who stood in their way. The great daimyo, startled by the noise, emerged from his tent, still believing it to be a fight among his own drunken soldiers. He shouted angrily for quiet, only to be met by the sight of 2 Oda spearmen charging directly at him through the curtain of rain. One, wielded by a warrior named Hattori Koheta, thrust at Yoshimoto's legs. Yoshimoto, a skilled swordsman, drew his prized blade and with a single, contemptuous slash, cut the man down. But as he did, another samurai, Mori Shinsuke, closed in. Yoshimoto deflected his initial spear thrust, the blades clashing with a shriek of steel. But in the struggle, the larger, more powerful Shinsuke tackled the daimyo to the ground. They wrestled in the mud for a moment, a primal struggle between 2 worlds. Then, Shinsuke drew his short sword and took his head. The impossible had happened. The great Imagawa Yoshimoto was dead. As the storm began to subside, Mori Shinsuke rose from the mud and chaos, holding aloft the severed head of the most powerful warlord in Japan. In that single, gruesome image, the battle was over. The victory was absolute. The storm has passed. As the last rumbles of thunder fade into the distance and the punishing rain softens to a drizzle, an eerie, rain-washed silence descends upon the gorge. In this quiet, the unimaginable truth spreads like wildfire through the shattered Imagawa ranks. Their master, the brilliant and invincible Imagawa Yoshimoto, is dead. A single cry of despair from a bodyguard who witnessed the fall is picked up and multiplied by thousands as the sight of their lord's severed head, raised high on a spear point, confirms their worst fears. It is a symbol of absolute defeat, a talisman of terror. The effect is instantaneous and catastrophic. The great Imagawa army, the 25,000-man force that was supposed to be the instrument of national conquest, collapses into its component parts. It is no longer an army, it is a panicked mob of terrified individuals. The intricate chain of command, the very spine of the army, is shattered. With their leader gone, there is no one to give orders, no one to rally around. Every general, every samurai, every foot soldier is suddenly, terrifyingly alone. Their only thought is of survival. They flee. In every direction, thousands of Imagawa soldiers drop their weapons, cast off their armor, and run. desperate to escape the valley of their humiliation. What was once a proud and disciplined force dissolves into a stampede of fear. Nobunaga's 2,000 men do not need to fight anymore. They simply have to stand, exhausted and blood-spattered, and watch as the unstoppable tsunami they had so feared recedes in a pathetic wave of terror, leaving behind a battlefield littered with a king's ransom in weapons, armor, supplies, and the bodies of the fallen. The victory at Okehazama was not just a victory, it was an annihilation of an army's will to fight, a psychological masterstroke that would be studied for generations. Oda Nobunaga returned to Kiyosu Castle not just as a victor, but as a legend in the making. His retainers, who had been convinced he was a fool leading them to their deaths, now looked upon him with a mixture of terror and awe. They greeted him in stunned silence, their eyes wide with disbelief. They were no longer serving a fool. They were serving a man who communed with demons and gods, a once-in-a-generation genius whose audacity was matched only by his brilliance. The victory sent a seismic shockwave across Japan. The great and powerful Imagawa clan, deprived of its leader, would crumble into insignificance, its vast territories ripe for the picking. And the Oda, a minor clan from a backwater province, were now, overnight, a major power to be reckoned with. The political map of Japan had been redrawn in a single, rain-soaked afternoon. This was the moment that the fool of Owari died forever. In his place, Oda Nobunaga, the Demon King, was born. His reputation for unconventional tactics, his ruthless use of intelligence, and his terrifying willingness to risk everything on a single, decisive stroke would become his trademark throughout his long and bloody career. Furthermore, the battle had a crucial, unforeseen consequence. It freed the young vassal in Yoshimoto's army, the man who would become Tokugawa Ieyasu, from his servitude to the Imagawa. This freedom would allow him to forge an alliance with Nobunaga, an alliance that would become the central pillar of power in Japan for the next 2 decades. The Battle of Okehazama was the first, critical step on Nobunaga's path to unifying a nation that had been at war with itself for 100 years. It proved that the old ways of honor and tradition could be shattered by speed, surprise, and a single, brilliant mind that refused to play by the rules. It was a thunderous gamble that paid off in the grandest fashion imaginable, setting a young, unknown warlord on a trajectory to become the master of Japan. The dragon had not just awoken, it had taken flight on the wings of a heavenly storm. Thank you for joining us on this journey back to feudal Japan. The story of Oda Nobunaga is one of many incredible tales from our world's past. If you want to see more stories about the battles and leaders that shaped our world, make sure you like this video and subscribe to our channel. And let us know in the comments what piece of history you think deserves to be told next.